So we're here to attempt this Pentominous borders puzzle by Jonas Gleim. I'm going to turn on composite inline, and in this case, I don't think I'll want number, or at least I won't be entering letters for the shapes at all. I'm going to draw some shapes that have to come out, and once we know we've got some of these marked borders, some of these shapes are going to actually pretty quickly mark up other groups where the borders will not be able to be recrossed. And doing that, we get a first pentomino here, which is this V shape. We get some places where we actually have, for instance, in this direction, we can't go all the way to make a V, so we've got to come down and take one more cell. But then we get a cell like this, it has to start coming up and form another pentomino, recognizing that's going to be distinct from the one we've already formed, and recognizing in this case this pentomino can't come further up, would be a V next to another V. We get a shape like this, and notice if I make this L, I make another L, so we're going to have some just shape-based eliminations to get this upper right corner completely done. And this marked in. I think these four are known for sure. We've got some progress on this right edge we can do pretty quickly. We have an I up above, so this can't be an I, it's got to be an L. And in doing that, this has to turn quickly over. This cell, though, is a new pentomino shape, which will look like this. And a pentomino is coming out of these three cells, so these are actually different shapes. This has to come to the left, this has to come down. We get a pentomino growing out of this corner, which comes down here, but this is an edge for it, so it's going to grow like so. We get a square with one more cell, which is a forced P, and also in this lower right corner, a forced I. Get this shape and this shape. Coming to this center box is maybe the first interesting deduction. This may or may not take an extra cell, but note that this cell and these three and then this cell are all part of the same group for sure. And once I know this cell is used, that boundary is marked and has to be a P with a V. Mark these in. This V shape keeps the cell below from coming to the left. That would form another V, which is no good. So this comes in, this can't come to the top because of the border it exists, it can't come to the left, it would form another V, it's touching to a V, so it's an N, a W, and I think that's going to finish out a lot of that grid. This may be where you start to ask, how is this a Friday puzzle, because you got over halfway done and got stalled here, and the remainder of the puzzle is much trickier, and I think a case where different people will struggle to make the logical steps, and I'll sort of show you some of the parts on my path. And it started by really thinking through recognizing there's an either or constraint where this pentomino can take one or the other cell. Was starting to get a little bit of the count of cells up above, and so I've colored in green all the cells out to these two choke points. This cell here and the cell here will probably have some natural count, and if we're anywhere near a multiple of 5, there's maybe something we can do, and if we're not near a multiple of 5, we could have more trouble. But let's sort of see what we've got. We've got 7 and 6 is 13, 14, 15. So we're exactly marking 15 cells right now. And that means there are two ways this grid can look. The first is that green is correct, and there are 3 pentominos in that space. The other is I take one cell here, and I take back one cell there. And in doing that, hopefully something that you see quickly, and I hadn't marked some of these into the grid, is that you form this U, but in forming that U, we also now form a shape like this. It has to come down, and notice it's forced to be a hexamino. There is no valid pentomino. And so this version where the green cell is here, but not up here, to get to a count of 15 is no good. And so this is the only valid decomposition of the top of the grid into a set of multiples of 5. That will complete this shape here, and I'm going to, I guess, get rid of all the color now because we don't need it at this moment for the top, but we're going to mark in some of what we know. We've got this coming up. If this group doesn't take this cell here, it would form an N next to another N, so for sure it takes this group. Conversely, if this doesn't take this cell below, it would form an I next to an I with those shapes growing out. That's no good, so we actually have to take this. This looks like a P or a Y. This is going to be part of some other pentomino shape, and we'll have to take this cell, it looks like. Let's actually come back to that in a second. So if this is a Y, this comes in and can form an N, but that's touching an N. or can form a Y, but that's touching a Y. And it can't form an L because it would leave behind a cell. So the Y is problematic. And that now forms this shape. These cells do not join to this shape down here. And where this has an option to take this cell and be like an L or a Y, in both of those cases we put a P next to a P. So this cell has to be part of that group. And so there's a unique decomposition in this upper corner into pentominos. But again, playing with the pentomino shapes will reveal what that elimination looks like. So we still have more to do. And I think this bottom left is potentially even trickier, but again, a good way to think about it is to start to decompose these spaces into counts. And I'm not saying that I have an F pentomino, but I sort of have 5 cells, and I have 10 cells, and now I have potentially 12, 13, 14. I have to sort of come down here. So right now I at least have 10 in green, and I can't have those 10 in green. I could have these 10 in green. Something like this, or like those 10 in green. So, you know, just knowing that we're sort of roughly at a ballpark of 2 by 5 is helpful here. So let's look at this left edge. And if this left edge doesn't take this cell, it's going to force an L next to an L, which looks very bad to me. So this has to be used. And where I was starting to color these things in green, notice that this group in blue is not part of that group in green. And so if we do have to keep taking cells, 11, 12, 13, 14, and one more is the look of this. And this one more cannot be this cell because we'd isolate 2 behind. So a way to potentially notate this is, and I would sort of mark this with like a dotted line. I have take one of these cells to the left or one cell to the right in red. And I can draw then the rest of this group. We're going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, and I can't take this cell, so this is going to be part of another group. Marking this in, I can't come over like this for a few reasons. One, it would form an N next to an N, but also now I know these 2 cells have to join, so this has to take this cell at least. It can't use this cell, so that has to come here. I can then come back here and say I take exactly one of these cells here again with one of the red lines. So red will be an either left or right option. Notice if I don't take this cell, if I come to the left here and come up here, I form an F next to another F. So that's not good. So this has to actually use this group to the right. This comes up. I still don't want to form an F next to an F, so I form an N, which forms a Y. And so I know these for sure. I now have an N here in the grid, which means this group in blue cannot be an N. It used to have this option for it, but it no longer does. So it's going to have to be a Y shape, and that forces the L down below. That then actually completes this space very cleanly as a Z. And I have these cells coming down. Looks like it could be an N or a W, but it's next to an N, so it is a W. And the last group will be a P. So there we go. We finished this tough puzzle. It's an interesting and really, really well-themed puzzle. We didn't talk about at the start, but where this whole grid just spells pentomino in the borders is really, really neat, and that works as the theme to solve through is a great example of how Jonas's design here worked. Hopefully that sort of intermediate stage, like where everyone got the Friday crush in this upper left and lower left part of the grid, breaking out into counts of 5, 10, 15, at least to visualize a grid, is one of the ways to really work through these harder parts of Pentominous puzzles. So hope you learned something by watching the solve, and we'll see you again soon.